and a 1, and a 2, and you know what to do. Alright, welcome to the stream. Previously I had to do some finagling, but you know what, we're back. We have Soup, Goblin, and Samuel. It's gonna be lovely, folks. But yeah, let's see, is anyone watching even? I don't know, it doesn't matter if people are watching. The important thing is I can make sure all my dear sweets are able to get able to learn about reading. Now today's reading, as I stated earlier in the video, is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. And it's quite a nice book, strong recommendation. You can get it from bookstores. It's quite good. Anyway, let's begin. Alright, so, the tower, which was not supposed to be there, plunges into the earth in a place just before the black pine forest begins to give way to the swamp, and then the reeds and the wind-gnarled trees of the marsh flats. Beyond the marsh, flats and natural canals, lies the ocean, and a little farther down the coast, a derelict lighthouse. All of this part of the country has been abandoned for decades, for reasons that are not easy to relate. Our expedition was the first to enter Area X for more than 2 years, and much of our predecessors' equipment had rusted, their tents and sheds little more than husks. Looking out over that untroubled landscape, I do not believe any of us could yet see the threat. There were 4 of us, a biologist, an anthropologist, a surveyor, and a psychologist. I was the biologist. All of us were women this time, chosen as part of a complex set of variables that governed sending the expeditions. The psychologist, who was older than the rest of us, served as the expedition's leader. She had put us all under hypnosis to cross the border to make sure we remained calm, and it took 4 days of hard hiking after crossing the border to reach the coast. Our mission was simple: to continue the government's investigations of Area X and slowly working our way from base camp. The expedition could last days, months, or even years, depending on various stimuli and conditions. We had supplies with us for 6 months, and another 2 years' worth of supplies had already been stored at the base camp. We had also been assured it was safe to live off the land if necessary. All our foodstuffs were smoked or canned or in packets, and our most outlandish equipment consisted of a measuring device that had been issued to each of us, which hung from a strap on our belts, a small rectangle of black metal with a glass-covered hole in the middle. If the hole glowed red, we had 30 minutes to remove ourselves to a safe place. We were not told what the device measured, or why we should be afraid if it glows red, and at first few hours I had grown so used to it that I hadn't looked at it again. We had been forbidden watches and compasses. When we had reached the camp, we set about replacing obsolete or damaged equipment with what we had brought and putting up our own tents. We would rebuild the sheds later once we were sure that Area X had not affected us. The members of the last expedition had eventually drifted off one by one. Over time, they had returned to their families, so strictly speaking they did not vanish. They simply disappeared from Area X and by unknown means reappeared back in the world beyond the border. They could not relate the specifics of that journey. The transference has taken place around a period of about 18 months, and it was not something that had been experienced by prior expeditions, but other phenomena could also result in premature dissolution of expeditions, as our superiors put it, so we needed to test our stamina for that place. We also needed to acclimate ourselves to the environment. In the forest near base camp, one might encounter black bears or coyotes. You might hear a sudden croak and watch a night heron startle from the tree branch and, distracted, step on a venomous snake, of which there were at least 6 varieties. Bogs and streams hid huge aquatic reptiles, and so we were careful not to wade too deep to collect our water samples. Still, these aspects of the ecosystem do not really concern any of us. Other elements had the ability to unsettle, however. Long ago, towns had existed here, and we encountered eerie signs of human habitation. Rotting cabins with sunken red-tinged roofs, rusted wagon wheel spokes half buried in dirt, and the barely seen outlines of what used to be enclosures for livestock, now a mere ornament for layers of pine needle loam. Far worse, though, was the low, powerful moaning at dusk. The wind off at the sea and the odd interior stillness dulled our ability to gauge direction, so the sound seemed to infiltrate the black water that soaked the cypress trees. The water was so dark here that we could see our faces in it, and it never stirred, set like glass, reflecting beards of gray moss that smothered the cypress trees. If you looked out through these areas toward the ocean, all you saw was that black water, the gray of the cypress trunks, and the constant, motionless rain of moss flowing down. All you heard was the lone moaning. The effect of this cannot be understood without being there. The beauty of it cannot be understood either. And when you see the beauty in desolation, it changes something inside you. Desolation tries to colonize you. As noted, we found the tower in a place just before the forest became waterlogged and turned to salt marsh. This occurred their fourth day after reaching base camp, by which time we had almost gotten our bearings. We did not expect to find anything here, based on both the maps that we had brought with us and the water-stained, pine dust-smeared documents our predecessors had left behind. But there it was, surrounded by a fringe of scrub grass, half hidden by fallen moss off the left of a trail, a circular block of some grayish stone seeming to mix cement and ground-up seashells. It measured roughly 60 feet in diameter, this circular block, and was raised from ground level by about 8 inches. Nothing had been etched or written into its surface that could in any way reveal its purpose or the identity of its makers. Starting at due north, a rectangular opening set into the surface of the block revealed stairs spiraling down into darkness. The entrance was obscured by webs of banana spiders and debris from storms, but a cool draft came from below. It's going pretty good, I think. It's one of my honestly favorite pieces of horror. I know I said that about Alice Isn't Dead, but, I say a lot of things. I say so much so often. Anyway, as I was saying, cool draft came from below. At first, I only saw it as a tower. I do not know why the word tower came to me, given that it tunneled into the ground. I could easily have considered it a bunker or a submerged building. Yet as soon as I saw that staircase, I remembered the lighthouse on the coast, and had a sudden vision of the last expedition drifting off one by one, and sometime thereafter the ground shifting in a uniform and pre-planned way to leave the lighthouse standing where it has always been, but depositing this underground part of it inland. I saw this in vast and intricate detail as we all stood there, and I, looking back, I mark it as the first rational thought I had once we had reached our destination. "This is impossible," said the surveyor, staring at our maps. The solid shade of the late afternoon cast her in cool darkness and lent the words more urgency than they would have lent the words more urgency than they would have let it otherwise. The sun was telling us that we'd soon have to use our flashlights to interrogate the impossible, although I'd be perfectly happy doing it in the dark. "And yet here it is," I said, "unless we're having a mass hallucination." "The architectural model is hard to identify," the anthropologist said. "The materials are ambiguous, indicating local origin, but not necessarily local construction. Without going inside, we will not know if this is primitive or modern or something in between. I'm not sure I would want to guess at how old it is either." We had no means of informing our superiors about the discovery. One rule for an expedition to Area X was that we were able to attempt no outside contact, for fear of some irrevocable contamination. We also took little with us that matched our current level of technology. We had no cell or satellite phones, no computers, no camcorders, no complex measuring instruments except for those strange black boxes hanging from our belts. Our cameras required a makeshift darkroom. The absence of cell phones in particular made the real world seem very far away from to the others, but I had always preferred to live without them. For weapons, we had knives, a locked container of antique handguns, and one assault rifle. This last a reluctant concession to current security standards. It was expected simply that we would keep a record, like this one, in a journal, like this one, lightweight but nearly indestructible, with waterproof paper, a flexible black and white cover, and the blue horizontal lines for writing, and the red line and the left mark in the margin. These journals would either return with us or be discovered by our next expedition. We had been cautioned to provide maximum context so that anyone ignorant of Area X could understand our accounts, and we had been ordered not to share our journal entries with one another. Too much shared information could skew our observation, our supervisors believe. But I knew from experience how hopeless this pursuit, this attempt to weed out bias, was. Nothing I had lived and breathed was truly objective, even in a vacuum, even if all that possessed the brain was a self-immolating desire for the truth. "Oh, I'm excited for this discovery," the psychologist interjected before she had discussed the tower much further. "Are you excited too?" She had not asked us that particular question before. During my training, she tended to ask questions like, "How calm do you think you would be in an emergency?" Back then, I had felt as though she were a bad actor, playing a role. Now it seemed even more apparent, as if being our leader somehow made her nervous. "Well, it's definitely exciting and unexpected," I said, trying not to mock her and failing a little. I was surprised to feel a sense of growing unease, mostly because of my imagination, my dreams, and this discovery would be among the more banal. In my head, before we'd crossed the border, I had seen so many things, vast cities, peculiar animals, and once, during a period of illness, an enormous monster that rose from the waves to bear down on our camp. The surveyor, meanwhile, just shrugged and wouldn't really answer the psychologist's question. The anthropologist nodded as if she agreed with me. The entrance to the tower leading down exerted a kind of presence, a blank surface that let us write so many things upon it. The presence manifested like a low-grade fever, pressing down on all of us. I would tell you the names of the other three if it mattered, but only the surveyor would last more than the next day or two. Besides, we were always strongly discouraged from using names. We were meant to be focused on our purpose, and anything personal should be left behind. Names belonged from where they had came from, not who we were while embedded in Area X. Originally, our expedition had numbered 5 and included a linguist. To reach the border, we each had to enter a separate bright white room, the door in the far end, and a single metal chair in the corner. The chairs had holes along the sides for straps, the implication of this being raised a prickle of alarm, but by then I was set in my determination to reach Area X. The facility that housed these rooms was under the control of the Southern Reach, a clandestine government agency that dealt with all matters connected to Area X. There we waited while innumerable readings were taken and various blasts of air, some cool, some hot, pressed down on us from vents in the ceiling. At some point, the psychologist visited each of us, and I do not remember what was said. Then we exited through the far door into a central staging area, with double doors at the end of a long hallway. The psychologist greeted us there, but the linguist never reappeared. She had second thoughts, the psychologist told us, meeting our questions with a firm gaze. She decided to stay behind. This came as a small shock, but there was also relief that it had not been someone else. Of all our skill sets, the linguist seemed to be the most expendable. After a moment, the psychologist said, "Now clear your minds." This meant she would begin the process of hypnotizing us so we could cross the border. She would then put herself under a type of self-hypnosis, and it had been explained that we need to cross the border with precautions to protect our minds from tricking us. Apparently hallucinations were common, at least that's what they told us. I no longer can be sure what is the truth. The actual nature of the border had been withheld from us for security reasons. We knew only that it was invisible to the naked eye. So when I woke up with the others, I was in full gear, including heavy hiking boots with a weight of 40-pound backpacks and a multitude of additional supplies hanging from our belts. All 3 of us lurched, and the anthropologist fell to one knee, while the psychologist patiently waited for us to recover. "I'm sorry," she said. This was the least startling re-entry I could manage. The surveyor cursed and glared at her. She had a temper that must have been deemed an asset. The anthropologist, as was her way, got to her feet, uncomplaining, and I, as was my way, was too busy observing to take this rude awakening personally. For example, I noticed the cruelty of the almost imperceptible smile on the psychologist's lips as she watched us struggle to adjust, and the anthropologist still floundering and apologizing for floundering. Later, I realized I might have misread her expression. It may have been pained or self-pitying. We were on a dirt trail strewn with pebbles, dead leaves, and pine needles damp to the touch. Velvet ants and tiny emerald beetles crawled over them. The tall pines, with their scaly ridges of bark, rose on both sides, and the shadows of flying birds conjured lines between them. The air was so fresh it buffeted the lungs, and we strained to breathe for a few seconds, mostly from surprise. Then, after marking our location with a piece of red cloth tied to a tree, we began to walk forward into the unknown. The psychologist somehow ever became incapacitated and could not lead us across the end of our mission. We had been told to return to await extraction. No one ever explained what form extraction might take, but the implication was that our superiors could observe the extraction point from afar, even though it was inside the border. We had been told not to look back upon arrival, but I snuck a glance anyway, while the psychologist's attention was elsewhere. I don't know quite what I saw. It was hazy, indistinct, and already far behind us. Perhaps a gate. Perhaps a trick of the eye. Just a sudden impression of a fizzling block of light, fast fading. And we will continue this book later. Thank you all for listening, and I want to give a shout out to Soup, Goblin, and Samson for being a real good sport.